The coronavirus pandemic has disrupted the world as we know it. It has upended transport, communication, as well as the financial markets. But the question is, what are the regulators doing to bring the situation to some level of normalcy? Joining us on Inside Government is Marcy Wanjau. She's the Acting Director General of Communications Authority of Kenya. She's going to guide us on how the authority is carrying out its business and ensuring that even as people work from home, they are safe and the content is safe as well. Thank you so very much indeed for joining us.
Oh, thank you too for inviting me.
Asante. Now, tell us, how have you been impacted by the pandemic? Because definitely we know for sure you have been.
Yes, indeed we have been impacted at the authority and as the country as large in a big way, because this is what you call real disruption. But despite the disruption, there are still commitments to be made. Indeed, from a regulatory perspective, we still have a public service obligation to ensure that consumers are able to receive services with good quality of service, and that the universal service concept, children enjoying education, even if now they have to do it from home, carries on. So we've really swung into a new space. First of all, at the operational level, with having to scale down staff and having staff work from home. This is quite a new experience, to undertake work significantly from virtual spaces, and at the same time assure the consumer and assure the licensees that we are still on top of things. So this has been the one big impact for us from an operational perspective. The government did give guidelines on how to undertake this work from home process, and we are complying with this to ensure that we are able to offer our services on day-to-day basis with minimal staff, with the support from others outside. Yeah.
This is absolutely unprecedented anywhere in the world. I mean, the world has never seen something like this in almost a century. And definitely, I mean, when the Communications Authority was crafted, it was not actually made for this kind of a situation. But now here we are. What would you say is the biggest disruption to your operations as we stand?
Indeed, one of the things that we have seen as a big disruption is the high expectations that our licensees have of us, that we are able to meet demand to queries on time or even in advance, and to be very, very efficient. And the effort to try and provide the same kind of assured services, even despite this kind of environment. What we have done, because we do recognize that indeed this situation, this disruption could be with us for weeks, maybe even months, is to try and actually get into a business continuity space, which as a regulator, and I'm sure even for the operators, have really gotten into, to identify which of our processes can we expedite in this space. We do recognize that government is increasingly very heavily reliant on ICT as a tool for communication. Individuals are using a lot of the platforms from our licensees to make payments, and we have seen a very good effort from our licensees to lower the tariffs so that people can be able to do that. And it is working well, I would say. And the big thing now is to step up and say, since we have had relationships, let's make use of these relationships to see that business is able to carry on as normal, and where there are problems, let's bring them out so that we can try and sort them out as soon as possible.
I mean, for the last 10 years, not actually 10 years, from 2007, when Kenya piloted the mobile payment system, we have seen an exponential growth, of this platform. And I was going through your statistics for the second quarter of 2020-2021 period. And there was a significant spike of almost 650 billion shillings, being transacted between the month of September to December of 2019. And this could not have come at a better time, when the government is urging people to go mobile and to go cashless. And now we have seen people, urging the government to do something about the cost of transactions.
Yes.
Are you having discussions with service providers to see how this can be scaled down, the cost of transactions?
Yes, this has been continuing conversations actually, and they are positive conversations. You saw in the last 2 or 3 weeks, there was the very positive move to lower the cost of access for money to move onto the mobile platform to enable payments, and this is going well. Interestingly also, if you noticed from our statistics, there is a sharp increase of uptake of services to government, where payments are now at 9.7 billion, from a space where about 5 years ago there was really not much in that space. So this is very encouraging, because with the mass uptake of government services, business services, and person to person, this in itself should be enough to justify a lowering of the tariffs as we go on. Yeah.
What are the? Well, it is true. I mean, we have seen a service provider saying that for transactions below 1,000 bob, it will be free of charge. But when you look at the transactions that are made, or transactions that are below 1,000 shillings, when you compare these with the overall transactions, you find out that a lot of Kenyans actually, they do transactions which is above 1,000 bob, and so a lot of them are not likely to feel the impact. So do we have like a definite answer, from the providers? I know this is something that even calls, the taxman into consideration, but do we have like a definite answer, like we are likely to have transaction cost coming down?
As I said, these are continuing conversations, and the initiative that was taken 2 or 3 weeks ago was actually to take care of the day-to-day living, that somebody doesn't have to handle physical money to buy milk, bread, to be able to do the day-to-day kind of things, and this is what it was targeted as. Of course, as you rightly put it, with the continued extension of this COVID-19 process, it might call for a rethink of what other concessions can be made in order to really bring in more people into that fold, and to make them really feel the positive impact of the concessions that are being granted. Yeah.
What are service providers, what do they feel about this? I mean, it's definitely, it's going to rob them, some revenue. But are they enthusiastic about this proposal?
I think this is a different season. And I must really take the opportunity to really sincerely thank our licensees, because we have really seen them put service ahead of profit in this season. We have been in extensive conversations about the need to increase capacity, because the users are spiking exponentially. And this means extra investments within the same space where we are asking for them to lower the prices or even offer services for free. And we have received positive uptake of some of these offers. So I believe it's a give and take and a delicate balance, but the important thing at the end of the day is not to see a situation where somebody had to go and unnecessarily expose themselves because they could not afford the transaction fee on that kind of a transmission, and this fortunately is not happening anymore. Yeah. The debate has always been, when you talk to your licensees, about, suppressing the cost of transactions. And they say that, they have been pushed to the limit because, there is taxes to be paid. There is duty to be remitted to the Kenya Revenue Authority. And this now is where the government comes in, and I'm talking about the National Treasury, and say, hey, look at this. We are living in unprecedented times. We're also going to lower duty and taxes, on some of these services. Have you engaged the National Treasury on the same? Yes, and indeed there is quite a bit of concessions that were given at the macro level, with corporate tax, income tax coming down and lowering. I believe this sent a very positive signal that this is the time to try and hedge each other, if only to ensure that we are able to maintain life at a normalcy as much as possible. We also did recognize that this kind of situation is a big hit on small and medium enterprises, who also comprise a big chunk of our licensees, and the effort to try and even create toll-free numbers where they can be supported with information on how to carry on and how to ensure continuity. And as we go forward, I think this will then lead us to a situation of actually looking at case-by-case scenarios to see how best to handle these kind of cases in order to ensure that businesses do not close down as best as possible. Yeah.
And I mean, with suppressed economic activities, we're definitely likely to see less transactions, going forward. Are they ready, and how are they preparing for a scenario like this if the situation was to be prolonged?
It's an interesting question you ask, Mr. O'Brien, because I have no answer. Because, usually...
Let's hear your thoughts.
Because usually, we plan on a contingency basis of maybe 4 weeks. If this increases, perhaps a quarter. If it increases, maybe half a year, maybe a year. So I think this is the kind of situation where we have to move, to roll with things and see how best to facilitate, to see how best to identify items that in these extraordinary times would be perceived as barriers or hindrances, and to see whether you can push them forward, whether you can eliminate them totally, for example, like payments, or whether to give payment plans to ensure that the business is able to keep on moving despite the difficulties that it is experiencing until this tides over and the situation begins to turn around. Yeah.
I mean, in a situation like this, how are you going to ensure, there is compliance to safety standards that are prescribed by the law? And at the same time, you're also being considerate to the times that we are living in as a regulator.
Okay. Quality of service is actually one of our highest commitments to our consumers, and this is where we backstop licensees to just ensure that there is a quality of service that is acceptable. Just last week, we had a conversation where we appreciate that the uptake of services is rising and very fast. So we have already agreed on a revised timetable of reporting, where previously reporting was done on a quarterly basis, but now it's going to be done on a weekly basis, so that it helps give information very timely on where the spikes are and where we need to focus to ensure that there is quality of service and appropriate speeds being provided, so that at the end of the day, there is the need to appreciate that we're in extraordinary times. However, the commitments for quality of service, for example, they remain. The commitment that we made to ensure that consumers have access to diverse services that are affordable remain. So we are in this as a conversation, working together with our licensees to ensure that we are able to live up to these commitments, us and them, as best as possible in this time.
And when you're talking about, a weekly reporting, this is of course to the regulator.
To the regulator.
And what about to the public?
Then this is what is then put together as statistics. Like we shared the third quarter statistics ending 31st of December last year. That is done on a quarterly basis. But appreciating the extraordinary situation we are in, should there be something that would make it very necessary to flag out to the public, or even inform them that some service is not going to be possible, then that would be made upfront so that consumers are aware of that outage. But our planning and our sequencing is that we will not get there, that we will already have put in arrangements in place, given whatever approvals that would be required to enable the operators to carry on providing business.
How is it significant, for the consumer of your of your services when the reporting regime has been changed from from quarterly to weekly?
Actually, it's because of the disruption we spoke about this week. Think of a typical situation. The adults go away out of the home, whether to work or to business, and the usage in the home front is very low. Now things have turned the other way around. The children are now doing home-based learning, so there's a heavy uptake of online learning right there, and when they're not learning, it's entertainment and playing games and all this kind of thing. So the home front has changed. The adults have also pulled out from their other activities out of the home and are now also consuming bandwidth within the same environment to be able to work from home or to conduct business from home. So this has, in a sense, is a situation where systems that were tailored for domestic use are now being used 24/7 for necessary work. So because of that, there's a need to pay very clear and critical attention to see what the uptake is in a certain area, so that you're able to ensure that the appropriate quality, the speeds are in place. And this would be for internet bandwidth, could also be for call quality and the like. Yeah.
And if we were to sit here and assume that, even telecom operators, have not been impacted by COVID-19, I mean, we'll be lying to ourselves.
Right.
In a situation whereby they have to scale down, their workforce, they have to scale down their operations, how are we at the same time going to ensure there is optimum service delivery?
This is where really we have to celebrate being Kenyans, because we actually do have the networks and the systems and the capabilities for it. A lot of these workings are being done remotely, so that even when people do not work from the office physically, except for the core staff, they are able to receive adequate support even as people work from home. Of course, there's a lot of adjustment, I'm sure, that's coming at the personal level, at the corporate level, to keep delivering, at the same pace, yet working in an environment that was not quite tailored for that and had to adapt overnight to be able to provide for this. And this is why, for us, we appreciate that we have good stakeholder relations with government, with our licensees, because it's conversations that have to carry on case-by-case basis.
I'm sure you saw the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. I mean, they have revised the basket that they use, to calculate the cost of the CPI, Consumer Price Index, in this country, and they have included things like data, they have included things like airtime. And so these two items, being considered to be critical to Kenyans, what are we going to do about pricing of these?
Good question. These are now no longer luxuries. We all appreciate that, and I believe this is why the KNBS has put them in the basket, because when you examine the revenue per user for data and airtime, it is increasingly creeping up in terms of market share of the individual's income, which tells us something, that increasingly they are relying on this data and airtime to meet their day-to-day needs, whether they be commercial, economic, or even social, to rely on them. And the licensees are hearing this, they're listening this. I'm sure they have noted that, in this particular time, the uptake has been very high. What does it then mean in order to be able to strike a balance where the consumer is able to afford quality service at an affordable price, and the entity is also able to conduct a business that is profitable? It's a balance that has to be struck. Yes.
And you also have to appreciate, I mean, we are not talking about the future.
It's the here and now.
We are talking about it is here and now.
Here.
I mean, thousands of people are working from home, consuming significant amount of data.
Right.
When are they going to feel the impact of these? We cannot wait for tomorrow.
Yeah.
It must have started yesterday.
Yeah.
Why aren't we having this? Why are we having this kind of a discussion?
Actually, already some concessions have been made, like the one we said for financial inclusion, in terms of lowering the price, the transaction fee that would apply. And the floor is open. The conversations are happening. The removal of tax rates on some of the elements have also been effected, and I believe some laws are going to be passed, some amendments are going to be passed this week or next week. So I would say that the floor is open, and views are still encouraged to come in, because government is listening, and it appreciates that this is extraordinary times which call for extraordinary measures, and it is the space for everyone who is concerned in that pipeline to step in and do what they need to do to make life comfortable, to enable people exist day to day despite the constraints.
And despite, government concessionary measures, like tax lowering, tax and tax breaks, I mean, the Kenyan telecom industry is hugely profitable sector. Why aren't we seeing some form of goodwill, from these companies? I mean, saying, look here, we've been making profit for the last, I don't know how many years. We want to offer our services at a reduced margin as part of giving back to the society?
I think you need to make a submission on this particular issue. I think you need to do so because,
but who is, those are the viewer submission actually, because you are at a good position, you know, to channel this kind of submissions.
Right, because already there's quite a bit that has been done, and some of it is in cash. You know, you can feel it in the shillings and cents, and the other is in kind, in terms of providing services that were not there before. And I can tell you that the efforts that are being put in place are numerous and commendable in this space.
Maybe you can outline them a little bit. For
example, and I'll cut across telcos and broadcasters and couriers, because they're all playing in the same ICT sector space. For couriers, for example, now with the increase of purchases online, is bound to increase the packets that are being distributed. And we have encouraged them, could you temporarily lower some of these prices in order to make it more affordable to distribute these packets? For broadcasters, we have a lot of children at home, and they need to carry on studying, or even adults looking for variety of entertainment and information. And we made an obligation, a must-carry obligation for the Edu TV channel to enable every child within the Republic of Kenya to access curriculum.
Edu TV is Education TV.
Education TV. So the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development has opened up all its curriculum to ensure that all the children in Kenya are able to study.
And they are carried across all the platforms?
All the platforms. So this was a must-carry obligation that we imposed last week, so that you ensure that all of them have access to this information. We've also really encouraged, you know, the broadcasters to increase educational material during this time, so that no child is left behind. In addition, we have brought in an obligation where every pay TV provider has been asked to open up their platform to be able to view all the free-to-air channels. This, in a sense, will expose the consumer to more variety, because people are now at home and for long hours, and they need to engage themselves productively, and they get to see all this information going forward. So there's quite a bit of effort. Then going to the other side of the money, the lowering of the transaction fee, to enable people to transact without necessarily having to carry around physical money. There has been quite a number of offers on broadband and speeds and the bundles being revised, so that you're able to get more than what you would ordinarily have gotten in this time, because it is appreciated that a lot of it is being used on very necessary activities like shopping or education purposes. So there's quite a raft. And I believe it's not the end yet, because as the situation continues to evolve, everyone is also thinking on what else can they do to make this even more tolerable, more bearable, more affordable.
Let's talk about, you know, courier services, and we have seen an uptick in courier services, you know, because a lot of people are at home, so they are doing home deliveries. But the question of hygiene now is coming up. How are you going? I mean, I know this is absolutely very hard, but how are we going to ensure that home deliveries, you know, they do not become the next frontier, you know, of transmitting the virus?
This is a very legitimate question you ask, because in the last announcement that was given by the CS Ministry of Health was that transmission is now happening at the community level. So it's the people within ordinary contact of the individual, and certainly a courier delivering a package very much is in that ecosystem, and it's a practical challenge. But I do know that now there are guidelines on how postal courier articles have to be handled, and the Courier Association has been very much at the forefront, guiding their members on how to handle these activities, so that by the time the article is put in for delivery into the home, the person enters and should find sanitizers, you know, within that home, or water, and the person receiving, and the things are left. And thankfully now, with the provision of the payment platform, there is no need for actual exchange for physical money. So money can be paid for from the mobile phone, and the articles are left. Now, when it comes to receiving those articles and taking them into the home, then every effort must be made to clean, to sanitize, to disinfect the articles that have been delivered before they are put into the home installed. And I think it is a best effort, and while doing those kind of transactions, to ensure that the observances of distance are made and the like. Yes.
Are you having discussions with the Association of courier service providers about maintaining proper health and sanitation levels, in the operations, and how are you going to ensure that these measures, are effected?
Yes, indeed. Thankfully, starting off with the government guidelines on the sanitation to be observed within business places and places of work, these are in compliance, and our licensees, our postal and courier licensees, are very aware of the need to comply with this kind of guidelines because of the very close contact that happens to be able to deliver these services. Then, of course, even the Kenyan public, is a critical backstop on the domestic level when receiving those articles, to also observe the same kind of precautions that, we have all been guided, and there's a lot of information in the media to ensure that people are able to live and exist day to day, and they're also able to protect themselves.
Let's talk about, working from home, and there's definitely, an increased activities, around online services. How are you sanitizing this ecosystem to ensure that the content that people are getting is, number one, safe, is number two, accurate, and number three, is reliable?
There's been quite a bit of information out there on how to schedule a day, because even I did realize that suddenly when you work from home, the structure that you have in an office misses, and it can be very easy to lose direction on the day. So there has been quite a bit of guidance on how to allocate the time of the day, when to study, when to work, when to stand up and rest, and when to get back to work. So this has been very, very helpful information. Then when it comes to sanitizing in terms of content, I would see it in two ways. There's the content consumption side, which we have an interest in as the Communications Authority of Kenya. And of course, the other side of, the sanitation, the hygiene and the cleaning up of laptops and surfaces to ensure that they are clean with soap and water or sanitizer, to make sure that as much as possible those surfaces are clean. But I'd like to focus a bit more on the content that you mentioned. We have a situation here now where if one is not careful, you will have children on media for the whole length of day. And the need for parents or guardians to ensure that when it is study time, it is study time. But of course, children do not study the whole day. When it is not study time, then the need to know what is the child doing on that platform after studying. And we do have a flagship initiative at the Communications Authority on child online protection called COP. And this has been a very useful flagship initiative, because it guides parents and guardians, school teachers, and others who surround a child on ensuring that a child engages with that platform in a way that is positive, that is responsible, and that the child is enabled to be aware and to pick up signs of intimidation, signs of danger, and to report it in good time, so that that platform is a platform for good, and that any unintended kind of dangers like cyberbullying or cyberstalking are picked up in good time. But in this season, let me also say that while our initiative largely focuses on children, this season is very ripe also for making adults very vulnerable as well, because a lot of transactions are being done online. There's a lot of media consumption. For adults also to ask, what websites am I going into? Are these websites safe? You need to trust and verify. To be cautious about situations of identity theft, because there's a lot of email scams and things like that that are likely to happen now that the uptake on the networks is very high. So adults and children alike need to approach the technology platforms with a lot of care. Yes.
Marcy, in the interest of time, because we have to wind up, let me ask you this. What would happen in a situation whereby the prevailing environment persists for another, let's say, 8 months?
This would be a situation where we say that unusual time call for unusual measures, and this would mean that a call to action for commitment to continue to offer essential services. From where I'm coming from, telecom services, postal and courier services are essential services. And we have seen that governments, businesses, individuals alike rely on these networks as a backbone for delivery of services, communication, information, and the like. So the commitment would be to ensure that you carry on, despite the circumstances, to offer the minimum services necessary to be able to offer quality of service and transmission as best as possible. And I believe this would be the call and the commitment for any other agency or facility, particularly essential services, to ensure that life is able to go on day by day.
Very well.
Yeah.
Mercy, we understand these are difficult times, but we are sure that CA is up to the challenge.
We are doing the best we can.
Very well.
Yes.
Thank you so very much, and all the best in your endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mercy Wanjau is the Director General of the Communications Authority of Kenya, joining us here to explain to us how the authority is carrying out its mandate to ensure that communication flows in this country in these very hard times. You've heard it from her. My name is O'Brien Kimani. Thank you so much for your time. You have been watching Inside Government. The rest of the programming continues. Stay right here.